Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are at 8:30. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. Welcome to the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Brian, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Brian.
We have food and fellowship. Starts every week at 8 o'clock. Feel free to get here early. Enjoy the refreshments we put out. Especially next week, there'll be a lot of people here. We got Brandon N. coming in if you've never heard him before. He's a good speaker. He's got a great message. There'll probably be a lot of people here. What else? We got hoodies for sale. For a while, we had limited sizes. We got a fresh batch in. We got pink ones too. So if you want to buy a hoodie, you can see a home group member after the meeting. They're available for purchase. What else? Yeah, if you want to get here early, you want to get involved in service with this group. This group does have a service commitment. We go to a treatment center up in Quakertown. It's a commitment every Sunday night. If you'd be interested in doing that, whether it be this week or any week, again, you can see me, you can see Ron after the meeting. If you just want to come up there, share a couple of minutes of hope and recovery with people. But with that, I'm going to bring our chairperson up for the night, hailing all the way from Canada. Please help me welcome Kara.
All right.
Good evening, y'all. My name's Kara, and I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic. Welcome home, everybody. This is a one-hour speaker meeting that meets every Saturday evening at St. Paul's Lutheran Church, 301 North Main Street, Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Food and fellowship starts at 8 p.m. and speaker at 8:30 p.m. The business meeting for this group meets every Saturday at 7 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. right here. Please come early and join us. The purpose of this group is to provide a consistent message of hope and recovery through God, reliance, and service to others through the practice and principles of the 12 steps. Re-record all speakers so that others may benefit from their message of recovery. If you wish not to be recorded, simply ask. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. The group would like to welcome everyone, especially newcomers. Is there anyone new or from out of town that would like to introduce themselves with their first name?
Drew, alcoholic.
Hey, Drew.
Hi, Drew. Welcome.
Glad you're here. Hi,
Welcome, Chris.
Glad you're here.
Guys, my name's Clancy, I'm an alcoholic visiting from New Library, Louisiana.
Hey, man. Welcome, man.
Welcome, everybody. The Conscious Contact Speaker Group encourages sponsorship. Would anyone with working knowledge of the 12 steps and willing to sponsor, please raise your hands. Are there any announcements for the good of AA? Our sister group is a Big Book study meeting that meets every Thursday at 7:30 p.m. just up the street at Salem UCC Church, 186 East Court Street, Doylestown. Coffee is on at 6:15. We have meeting lists and big books on easy terms. Please see me or any home group member after the meeting. If you cannot afford a big book, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group will give you one at no charge. Anyone willing to make donations for the purpose of big books and CDs to help those who cannot afford them can put donations in the jar on the table marked Big Books and CD donations. All CDs are available free of charge. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, the Conscious Contact Speaker Group of Doylestown, PA, and our Facebook group. Subscribe and share. You can find our speakers there. Join our Facebook page to keep informed and share upcoming events and meetings. Now I would like to introduce Gary. He's going to come up and read our Just for Today prayer of recovery. Let's give him a warm welcome. Woo!
Hi, I'm Gary. I'm an alcoholic. Hi, Gary. Just for today, prayers are of recovery. Just for today, I will be agreeable. I will look as well as I can, dress becomingly, talk low, act curiously, criticize not one bit, not find fault with anything, and not try to improve or regulate anybody's except myself. With that being said, let's give a warm welcome to Matt.
My name is Matt S. I'm an alcoholic. Welcome home. All right. And the AA preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem. and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. Does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Next, we'll be having Michelle.
Hi everyone, I'm Michelle and I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic. And these are the 12 steps of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Step 7, humbly asked Him to remove our shortcomings. Step 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Step 10, continued to take personal inventory when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Step 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. And step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. And with that, I'd like to invite Kara back up to take over the meeting.
I'd like to acknowledge that I'm sorry I forgot to introduce some women in the back. Would you kindly introduce yourselves and raise your hand? First time here?
I've been here before. My name is Liz. I'm an alcoholic. I asked my girlfriend to come to this meeting with me because I was so inspired by Mom many years ago.
Oh, well, thank you. My apologies for not acknowledging you, but welcome. We are so glad y'all are here. We have another newcomer.
My brother, he's a visitor. My name's Kenny and I'm an alcoholic and I'm visiting from Olympia, Washington.
Welcome. Wonderful. The 7 tradition states every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. At this time, I would like to pass the basket. We have no dues or fees, but we have expenses. The group provides many services. Your donations cover food, rent, big book CDs, events, workshops, etc. There is absolutely no smoking on church property. Please take a moment to silence all cell phones and limit movement during the meeting and distractions. Now, I'd like to introduce the speaker as a good friend of the Conscious Contact Speaker Group. Let's give Day D a warm welcome. He came all the way up from Bowie, Maryland. Woo!
Hey everyone, I'm Dave Doss. I'm an alcoholic. Hey, Dave. And man, I love the energy in this group. Man, it's hard. All my stuff's falling out of my big book. Man, it's hard not to be excited coming to this group, especially when they got like donuts that are like just packed with sugar. They're amazing. And hey, I want to thank Clancy and Kenny, who you heard introduce themselves from Louisiana and Washington. Clancy told me they were doing a road trip and stopping by Annapolis, Maryland, where I lived, and I said, they said, hey, you know, what are you doing the next couple of days? And I said, well, you could join me on a road trip to Doylestown, Pennsylvania. And they're like, we're in, you know. So we had like a 3-hour meeting on the way to the meeting. We're gonna have a meeting. We're gonna have a 3-hour meeting on the way back from the meeting, and. And that's the way I got sober. I've got a sobriety date. It's June 23rd, 1990. So if I'm 34 plus years into this thing, I'm 56 years old, and if you do the math, I got here when I was 22 years old, and when I got here on June 23rd, 1990, I've been in and out of AA for 3.5 years at that point. And I'm someone who came to Alcoholics Anonymous before I was legal drinking age in the state of Maryland where I lived, and I didn't get here too soon, right? And so part of what I like to do is I like to kind of frame a little bit of my talk with a couple things out of the big book as I'm going through. And one of the first things that I think that I usually like to do is read a section out of Bill's story on page 11. Now the events of this paragraph happened 90 years ago, right? 90 years ago. And what amazes me about this book is that I find myself in there long before I was ever born, right? And so this is Bill. So here he is in his story, and Bill is writing about a guy named Ebby Thatcher, who 12-step Bill. And when I was new to AA, this section of the book confused the hell out of me because I had heard that Bill W. and Bob S., Dr. Bob, had started this thing. So I'm like, who is this dude? Some dude is showing up, and it looks like this dude is 12-stepping Bill. And without going into a long history, one of the powerful things about Alcoholics Anonymous is, and I just think it's just a beautiful story, is how all these different threads came together to create what we have as Alcoholics Anonymous now. Everything from, a guy named Roland Hazard, being treated by Carl Jung, to this thing called the Washingtonian movement, to, Roland becoming part of this Oxford thing that came to the U.S., that Ebby became a part of, and Ebby was friends with Bill. I mean, all these sort of pieces that come together, the thread of God's hand that brings together what we have today. It's just a beautiful, powerful story. And so if you haven't had a chance to do that. This isn't going to be history talk. But I wanted to give the context, because here is Bill, who's drinking himself to death. He gets this call from his New England prep school friend, Ebby T., and he's thinking, oh man, it is great. Ebby and I are going to tie one on. And Ebby comes over, and Ebby is sober. And he has something in his eye. Man, he's got that sparkle in his eye. And Ebby says, I've got religion. And what Ebby goes on to tell him about is really what more or less has become the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous. The Oxford group had 4 principles, very similar to what we do today. And so Bill, after Ebby left, he probably kept drinking. And then he writes in here on page 11 his reflection on that visit with Ebby. And in a paragraph, Bill tells my story through the lens of Ebby T, 90 years before tonight. And so this is what Bill says. He said, but my friend sat before me and he made the point-blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap of humanity to a level of life better than the best I've ever known. And if I don't say anything else tonight, I want you to know in one sentence, my story is that when I came to you on June 23rd, 1990, I was on the scrap heap of humanity. And I think about that, I think about a junkyard. I think about all the stuff that you don't want, that is so broken you can't do anything with it anymore, and you just got to throw it away and be done with it. That's what my life looked like. The people that loved me wished me dead. The people who were around me knew I was hopeless. They had watched me come in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous for 3.5 years. They had watched me continue to deteriorate until I was literally on a bed dying. Scrap heap of humanity. And I can tell you without a doubt, 34 plus years later, that I have been given a life better than the best I've ever known. On the inside. And a good bit on the outside. It's not too bad either. But on the inside, where I live, right? Alcoholics Anonymous and the God that you introduced me to, the 12 steps, sponsorship, being part of the chain that passes on the grace of God, the conduit through which power flows to change lives. This is what I've got to experience in the last 34 plus years, man, and I'm excited about it. I am still excited about it 34 years later, you know. And that's why I'm always happy to still say yes when somebody asks me to, you know, when Ryan calls me up and says, hey man, can you come up to Doylestown? It's been a while, you know. And a couple weeks ago, I guess maybe it's been about 4 weeks ago, you know, I have to still come up here because one of my sponsees, Mark A., who was up here about a month ago, Mark says, hey, I got this call from Ron, and he said, I'm going up there, you know, in December, and I couldn't ride up with him, but, you know, Mark knows that he has to say yes when people ask him to do things in Alcoholics Anonymous. That although he's got a job and a couple kids and a wife and a busy life, he knows that with 20 years sober, he's not too busy to say yes and come up here. And so when Ryan calls me and says, hey Dave, Mark was just up here. You coming up? We lead by example in Alcoholics Anonymous. And my sponsor, Tom F., told me early on, man, if that calendar date is open and you can possibly do it, you always say yes, you know. And so it's a privilege and honor to be here with you tonight. Here's what June 22nd, 1990 looked like for me. I don't know about you, but I didn't get here on a good run. That first sponsor, Tom F., he talked about his fundamental problem as an alcoholic was he was not a problem drinker, he was an answer drinker. That alcohol did something for him that no matter what consequences came and alcohol did to him, it was worth it. It was worth it. And I think what he meant by that is alcohol takes away, in doctor's opinion, it talks about we are restless, irritable, and discontent. And for the alcoholic like me, I reach a place, and for me, it was before I took a drink. You know, I don't know about you all, but I grew up just not feeling right. I just felt like I didn't belong anywhere. And I love what was said here tonight. Welcome home. Welcome home. Because the reason I still come to Alcoholics Anonymous all this time later is because I feel like I belong here. I don't know many of you in this room, but when I walk in here and I share my story and you share yours and we connect through that common bond, we connect through that language of the heart. We connect through that simple experience of one alcoholic passing on their experience to another to benefit all of us. That through that powerful, powerful, powerful thing we do, I get to become part of. You know, and that's such a powerful thing. And the first time I had a chance to go to Akron, you know, make the pilgrimage, it happened to be a time where it wasn't Founders Day, there wasn't a lot of people there. And so the first time I walked into Dr. Bob's house in Akron, Ohio, it was me and a guy I sponsored, and there was one woman there in the house. It was three of us. And when I walked through that door, she said, welcome home. Welcome home. You know, and home is where the heart is. My heart is with you. And I sat down at that table where Bill and Bob sat, and me and my sponsee had a cup of coffee, and I still got the mugs at home because you can buy them. You know, and I thought about how powerful it was to sit there. And hell, this was 20 plus years ago. But I still remember that welcome home. Welcome home. But on the early hours of the morning of June 22nd, 1990, it was not a good day. You know, I had, my grandfather had picked me up out of jail that morning. I was a bright light nightclub, fast car, you know, kind of drinker. And, you know, by the time I had hit 22 and been in and out of AA for 3.5 years, you know, I had been in more than 100 mile an hour car accident. You know, I'd had my teeth knocked out with a pool stick. You know, I've been stabbed, I've been shot at, you know, I've been in jail, you know, I've been in treatment centers, right? The typical kind of story for an alcoholic in and out of AA. You know, when I came at 19, I thought I wasn't as bad as you, and on June 22nd, 1990, I thought I was so bad that I couldn't have what you had. I thought I was one of those unfortunates, right? That somehow I was constitutionally incapable of being honest with myself. I read that big book I don't know how many times. I drank twice on hand abuse. I had delusions like I'm not an alcoholic in the country of Mexico, right? I mean, I don't know if you've had these kind of experiences of how alcoholism will flat out lie and delude us into thinking that we can drink again. But I did it over and over and over and over again. And people who loved me were just standing around in the middle of the tornado that was tearing my life and theirs apart and just couldn't understand. Why couldn't I see it? And so when my grandfather picked me up out of jail that morning for assault and battery charge from the night before, he had that look in his eyes. The people that love us, and by this time there's not a lot left, right? It's my mom's parents. My mom's an alcoholic at this point. She's done a geographic cure to Florida with my stepdad, and there ain't no friends. The girlfriend's gone. She stuck her finger in my chest about 2 weeks before and said, "I wish I would have never met you. You SOB, you'll never change." After I tortured her for multiple years and made the promise after promise after promise it was going to be different. And like I know, if you'd have hooked me up to a lie detector test when I made those promises to her, that I would have passed because I meant them. But see, the disease that I have means that a day, a week, a month later, that mental obsession comes on me, and I'm restless, irritable, and discontent, and it's either blow my brains out or take a drink. That's the disease that I have. Fish swim, birds fly, alcoholics like this guy drink, and there is nothing that can change that on the face of this earth. And so my grandfather picked me up that morning, and we had the quiet ride to try to find my car, which was in an impound yard because I had parked it in the wrong place. Didn't even really remember where it was. And there wasn't any promises about it's going to be different this time. There wasn't any of that stuff, right? And I got to my car, and I went to do what I know how to do now, because I'm not drinking for fun anymore. I'm drinking to keep from eating that gun I'm carrying, right? Because I got a .357 Magnum with the serial numbers filed off because I'm drinking every day and selling drugs and running the streets. That's what my life has become. And I was taught well. I was raised by good people who taught me morals and values. Men like that grandfather who picked me up, who was a World War II vet, greatest generation. My dad was killed in the Vietnam War, and when my dad was killed in the Vietnam War, my grandfather said to my mom that I'll step in and be that boy's dad because I owe it to his father to do that for him. And he did that from the time he made that promise until he took his last breath. And that man just, he stuck with me, but he was broken. I broke people that loved me, and he was broken. And so I started drinking that day just to keep from eating that gun, and found my buddy Mike along the way. We shut down the bars, and it wasn't a good night, it was a bad night, but I was shutting down the voices, and we were leaving the bar, and it was me and my buddy Mike who were pretty tight, and a friend of Mike's brothers called Gene, named Gene. One of these days I'm going to run into Gene in these rooms, and we'll have a good chat. And we were leaving that bar, and my nickname at the time was Crazy Dave. It wasn't Tough Guy Dave or Gangster Dave, right? It was Crazy Dave, and not like crazy, like, oh, Dave's crazy, isn't he fun? No, it's like Dave is crazy, needs straitjacket, mental institution, Crazy Dave. That's the kind of guy I was, because I would change really quickly. You know how in our book it talks about the real alcoholic, talks about a Jekyll and Hyde drinker? That was me, and you go from Dr. Jekyll, the nice upstanding man, to Mr. Hyde, like a crazy, insane monster, and like that fast, right? And so my nickname was Crazy Dave, and wasn't a good night, wasn't a bad night, and so I got in a fight with Gene over who was going to sit in the front seat of the car on the way home from the bar. Now we were in downtown Baltimore City, and we were on the second story of a parking garage. And so let me explain to you a little bit about parking garage architecture. We're in the middle of the city, and we're on the upper floor, and on the outside wall of the parking garage is a concrete wall about this high, so people like me don't drive our cars off of the wall into the street below, right? Now, the wall's only about that high, and then between the top of the wall and the next floor is a big space, like a window, but it's open. And so Gene and I get in a fight over who's going to sit in the front seat of the car on the way home from the bar. I started the fight because I wanted to sit in the front seat, because Mike was driving the car, and I had ridden in the front seat on the way up, and Gene thought he ought to have his turn in the front seat. But Gene did not understand the pecking order, and he didn't appreciate who I was, and so Crazy Dave came out and started punching Gene. Well, I start punching Gene, and then Mike flips out because Crazy Dave has now shown up and overreacted, and Mike's trying to talk Crazy Dave off the ledge. But I stopped paying attention to Gene while Mike and I are having a conversation about Crazy Dave. Now, while I'm having the conversation with Mike, Gene is now very pissed because Gene has been hit in the face about 4 times really hard and getting up off the ground. And so when Gene gets up, he tackles me. And I don't think Gene meant for this to happen, but when he tackled me, I went out over that wall in that parking garage, 20 feet below, landed on my head on the concrete sidewalk of Lombard Street in Baltimore City, and it fractured my skull from one side to the other. I still got a ridge that runs around my skull all the way around here, from where I fractured my skull from one side to the other. And the bottom line of that was by the time they got me to the hospital, I was bleeding out my ears, and half my body had become paralyzed, and the doctors told my family if I didn't die that night, I'd be brain dead the rest of my life. And I never want to forget in the early hours of June 23rd, 1990, that that's what I brought to Alcoholics Anonymous. So when I talk about scrap heap humanity, it's on every level. It's the physical. There was, they didn't think I'd live through the night. It was over. And I knew it was over. Because, like I said, I was a guy that carried guns around the streets, and I had been busted up more than once. I've been knocked out, had my teeth kicked out, right? Been in more than 100-mile-an-hour car accident. I've been busted up a good bit. And this one was different. I could feel the life leaving me. And I could feel it was like there was a chill in the marrow of my bones. It was so cold and so dark. And I was scared in a way that I've never been scared before or since. I used to talk tough about death until I faced it. And I knew it was over. And it was like there was this thought of me, like this is not the life I was supposed to live. This is not the death I'm supposed to die. But here I am, and it is over. And at this time, my grandfather and my grandmother have come to the hospital. And it's kind of like I'm out for an hour, and then I'm conscious for a minute or two, and then I'm out for another hour or two, and they're like a coma. And so as I come to, right, my grandfather's holding my hand, and what he described to me later, and he was World War II, fireman, paramedic, right? He told me later, he said, I have seen a lot of people in your condition, Dave. He said, I've never seen one live. So he's looking down at his grandson, who's like a son to him. My grandmother, who's a good Christian woman, is praying on me on the other side. And she's not praying that God will, magically heal me. She's praying that God either take me home tonight with him and end my suffering, or he make me whole. Don't leave me this way. That's the prayer a woman who loves me like a son is praying on me. And I'm broken, not only sort of physically, but I'm broken mentally. I can't comprehend what's going on, and I'm broken spiritually. There is if a person can be in hell and still conscious, that is where I am. It is like I am devoid of any hope, of any light, and there is nothing but darkness. In Dante's book, The Inferno, he describes levels of hell. And we think about when we think about the fiery gates is often an illustration that's used, but in Dante's book, that's just the early levels of hell. The lowest level of hell is a cold, frozen lake devoid of all hope. And that description describes where I was at spiritually. Scrap heap of humanity, nothing left on any dimension of life. It is over. And as my grandfather looks at me dying and holds my hand, I look at him with what he tells me later is just his eyes of just terror. And I ask him if I'm going to die, and a man who I had hardly ever seen cry in his entire life, his hand begins to shake at mine and a tear runs down his cheek, and I know the answer. And I say the most sincere and humble prayer that I've ever said in my life. It's the prayer of the dying man or woman, God, please help me. 4 words, no conditions, nothing, just please. Please help me. And I didn't get the bright light that Bill Wilson got. I didn't get God in the room. I didn't get you all running in with a dozen of them really good donuts and a cup of coffee, right? What I got was my eyes rolled back in my head, and I went to a coma, and I came to 2 hours later. And we were listening, Clancy and Kenny and I were listening to my first sponsor, Tom F., who's no longer with us in body, but will always be with me in spirit on the way up here. And Tom believed that, man, if you were grateful for your sobriety, you had to be passing it on. And he was in his bed, and it was about 2:30 in the morning when he got a phone call from my grandmother. And the phone call went like this, because he had been trying to help me for those 3 years in and out of AA. He never gave up on me. He was always there for me. In fact, he did what it tells us to do in our big book in working with others, and he made sure my grandmother had his number. And what he said to her is, the time may come when it seems like all lost. The time may come when it seems like he is absolutely without hope. And if you call me, we will come. And so my grandmother picked up that little piece of paper with Tom F. phone number on it that she had folded up in her purse, just waiting for the moment. And she thought, well, I told him my call. And what Tom told me, she told him was, hey, we wanted you to let you know David will probably die tonight. And we really appreciate everything that you've done for him. And we thought you ought to know, and if you can pray, we'd appreciate it. And Tom said, I'll be right there. The man got out of his bed with 9 years of sobriety. Landline on the nightstand. This is not cell phone days. This is landline on the nightstand. First of all, he took the call. Got out of his bed and he came to that hospital. And I was told he stood there and waited for 2 hours. And when my eyes popped open, I was in that little ICU, and as my eyes pop open, what I hear is what turned out to be my grandmother's pastor giving me the last rites. Because my grandmother believed that, faith without works is dead. And what she did is after she called Tom, she called her pastor. And she was a good Christian woman. She had a prayer group of all these old Christian women. And she started calling, they're waking them up and they're answering their phone. And they're getting on their knees and praying for Shirley's grandson. And in my early days, I thought my prayer was the prayer that mattered. In my early days of arrogant recovery, I thought my prayer, God, please help me, was the one that mattered. I'm not so arrogant tonight to think that the prayers of a group of spiritual warriors, sure, they look like my grandmother. They're, 70 years old, and they got white hair, and they're 5 foot tall and 5 foot around and can't see over the steering wheel. That's what they look like here on earth. But man, in God's eyes, man, they're special forces. They're spiritual warriors, special forces, man. And they're coming to help me. And they're coming to help me. And so our pastor prayed on me, and what he prayed was the last rites. He prayed that God might find forgiveness for me in the next life, for this is over. And I knew that prayer. I knew the prayer he was praying, and it matched what I was feeling, and then I knew it was over. And as that man walked out the door and I became fully conscious, I looked on the wall, and there's Tom F. And I remember being baffled, like, what's he doing here? And at first, I swear to God, this is what I thought. I thought maybe I have died. Right? And maybe what happens is I've gone to some kind of like AA purgatory where your sponsor shows up and lectures you on the 12 steps for like 1,000 years until you burn off all your alcoholic sins, and then maybe you go to heaven. And but no, I already told you what happened is that man got out of his bed and waited, and he waited for that moment. He waited for that moment, and it was just me and him. And when my eyes locked onto his, there was a look of love, compassion, and conviction that words fail to describe. I mean, words fail me sometimes to describe the depth and the horror that I had that night, but words also fail to describe the beauty and the power and the grace that was poured out of me. I couldn't really see it now, I couldn't really see it then, but God, do I see it now. God, do I see the knife edge of light and dark, the spiritual warfare that was going on, the battle for one man's soul that was being waged that night between the darkness and destruction of alcoholism and hell and evil and darkness and all those things, if you believe in them or not. And the light and the power and the grace that lies through love and through everything that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous. And on that knife edge hung my fate. And I believe when my eyes locked on to Tom's, and that look of love, compassion, and conviction. And he said he was drawn to me. He said, he looked at me and he said, I was covered in blood and vomit. They couldn't stop the bleeding out my ears, and I was getting sick on myself, and I'm paralyzed, and there's tubes, and there's hoses. And he said it wasn't any of that. He said he looked into my eyes, and he saw the depth of the pain and despair and the horror of it all. And he said his heart broke for me. And he walked over and he looked down, I'll never forget it. He looked down at me as a father looks at as God as a father would look at his broken child. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he says, it never has to be this way again, Dan. And that was the early hours of the morning of June 23rd, 1990, and I've never had a day as dark or bleak since. Scrap heap of humanity. And it cracked the door to the opportunity for the life that I have today. They say willingness is built on a foundation of desperation. And boy, I was about as desperate and broken as you can get and still be breathing. And what happened for me was real simple. Tom didn't just come that night. You know, he came that night and said that, you know, put his hand on my shoulder and stayed with me a little bit until I passed out again, and I came to the next day, and over a period of a couple weeks, I don't know how many times Tom came back. Every day he came back sometimes, and he brought you with him. I mean, like AA, you know, the AA that I got sober with, the AA that I hope I still have and do and am part of today, is the kind of, I call it Special Forces AA, right? You know, this is not the everyday AA. These are the people who are devoted and dedicated in a way that is truly special. And those people brought meetings to that hospital room because they knew I couldn't get out and go to a meeting. You know, we were listening on the way up, and you know, one of the things that we were talking about, my sponsor Tom was giving a talk on love and service, and he quoted a line from the big book. It says, no greater love has anyone than this, and to lay down their lives for one another. Right? And that's exactly what you all were doing for me. You were laying down your lives 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day at a time to come carry a message of hope to me. And thank God you did, because I don't know if you remember your early days, but it would look like this. When you all would come, you give me just a little spark of hope. And it seemed like as soon as you would leave, the committee would come back in. And it would immediately start telling me how this is never going to work, how I'm going to drink again, how, I'm going to be paralyzed the rest of my life. There's no more girlfriend left. There's no college education. There's none of the things that I had held on to before. It's all gone. And I'd be about ready if I'd had a gun to kill myself again. And then you come back and I get a little bit of hope again. And it went on like this for weeks. And then eventually they sent me home. And I couldn't do anything except shuffle in. Right? And here's my poor grandparents, right, who have taken me in. I'm 22 years old. I'm paralyzed. I can't walk. I can't speak. My eyes open all the time because it won't shut. Right? When I eat, food falls out of my mouth. And I've been I've been a varsity athlete in a couple of sports. And I can't walk. I kind of have to be helped and shuffle. That's what they've got. Congratulations, you didn't die. They call it traumatic brain injury. Severely disabled was my prognosis. And you all didn't care. I was home 2 hours when you showed up at my front door. 4 of you from my first home group, the Magazine 12 and 12. Led by my sponsor, of course. Now, my sponsor was sober 9 years. I could not imagine 9 years. That was forever. But there was Jerry N., who was sitting there. Jerry had 6 months. We were talking about Jerry last night. In fact, the guy that spoke at my meeting last night had 12-step Jerry. Or Jerry had 12 stepped him. And there's Jerry N., there's Jim M. Jim M. had about 6 months, 2. And there was the other Dave D. who had 9 months. And I thought, sitting there, I thought, I can't imagine 9 years, but I had almost 6 months once in those 3.5 years, and I wasn't doing things like Jim and Jerry are doing here. And what happened for me that night is I really got the second step. See, I kind of had the first step. I had the first step every morning when I got up and I looked at that powerless face. And I had 3.5 years of experience of I cannot beat alcoholism. That I absolutely cannot beat it. I went from thinking I was too young, too this, too that, to be an alcoholic, to somehow thinking, I can't get it. I don't know how you all can get it, but I can't get it. And that's powerless and unmanageable. And my bridge between step 1 and step 3 was you. You came to that hospital. You came to my house. You brought meetings. You believed it would work for me when I didn't believe it would work for me. And you were so sure of it. Those men that sat at that table that night, they were so sure if I did what they did, that I would get what they got. They seemed to believe it was totally possible. Not only possible, but it would absolutely happen. And I thought, maybe, just maybe, what if they're right and I'm wrong? Just maybe, and on that spark of hope was the bridge between step 1 and step 3. I came to believe, not through some internal awakening, some internal spiritual connection with a God of my deep understanding. I came to believe it because you believed it for me. And because your actions shouted to me that you really cared And my sponsor, Tom, told me I could borrow his God until I got my own because he was certain his was big enough for both of us. Those are the kind of people I got sober with. And after a couple of weeks and a month of that, they could take me out and they'd shuffle me out into a car. And they'd throw me in the back seat of the car, and we'd do what we did tonight. They'd put me in a car, and we'd drive past 50 perfectly good meetings to go to a meeting 3 states away, spending 2 or 3 hours in the car, and then we'd have a meeting like we're having tonight. And then we'd get back in the car, and we'd have the meeting on the way from the meeting for 3 hours, and 7 or 8 hours later, I would get home exhausted, and they'd drag me up out of the backseat of the car, and they'd march me in. My grandmother would be standing there wondering why I'm home so late, making sure I'm sober. And she was grateful. It was one of the AA guys delivering me to the front door. And they would take me in and shuffle me into my bed, and then we'd do the same thing the next day. And I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait to be with you. I couldn't wait to go with you. Because in those car rides, I got spoon-fed hope, bit by bit by bit. And it wasn't very long. It was a couple months into it, and we got to that part in the 3rd step. And what had happened for me is I was still paralyzed. I was destroyed. And what had happened for me was I got what's on page 63. I am physically broken. Nothing has changed. But what's happened is hope and the power and the grace of Alcoholics Anonymous and the God that my sponsor was introducing me to, and very slowly taking my hand out of his and putting it into God's hand. I didn't realize that. Had begun to take hold. And what I got, this is what I got. And keep in mind, it's kind of crazy because I couldn't believe what was happening, and I thought I was losing my mind. And here's what it says. It says, you know, when we quit playing God, and we decide that God's going to be our director, He's the principal, we are His agents, He is the Father, we are His children, right? That this concept was the keystone of the triumphal arch through which we will walk free men and women, right? And then it says if you do that, now I'm still all screwed up on the outside, it says, here's what it says, what will happen. We have a new employer, being all powerful. He provided what we needed if we kept close to Him and performed His work well. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life as we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of His presence, we began to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. Reborn. Whole new life. No more scrap heap. And I think I'm losing my mind because this is what happens to me, and there's something happening on the inside. And I call my sponsor up, landline, right? And I'm blubbering and snotting, and I don't know what's happened. I literally think I'm losing my mind. I'm not an emotional guy at the time like I am now, right? You know, all that emotion, all that stuff has been beat out of me by the streets, and all of a sudden, man, it's all coming out, and I don't know what's happening. And finally, I said to my sponsor, as I'm blubbering and just talking nonstop, I said, Tom, am I losing it? Am I losing it? And there was a pause on the line. I can still remember. And I can almost see him with a cup of coffee in his hand and a big smile going, no, Dave, you're not losing it. You're getting it. What you're having, son, is not a mental breakdown. You're having a spiritual awakening. And what that is it talks in here about when we straighten out spiritually, we then begin to straighten out mentally and physically. And that's what happened for me. It was from an inside spiritual place that I began to heal. It's from there that the real growth began to happen, that the real grace and power of God began to transform and work through my life. And it's happened for me not because I'm special. It's happened for me so that I pass it on to others. That's why it happens for us. I think that's why it happened for me anyway. And so I go to the neurologist that I've been going to the next day, literally the next day after I have this event, and the guy throws 2 MRIs up on the screen. And what would happen was, they're about 3 months into it now, and every 2 weeks, right, I go to this neurologist, and they would MRI me the day before, and then they'd look at the one from the day before and the one from 2 weeks before. And basically what he said the last time I was in there 2 weeks ago was, you've gotten back about all you're going to get back. You're going to be the way you're going to be the rest of your life. And so I think it's time for us to start taking some action. We're going to have to sew your eye shut because you're about ready to go blind in that eye because it won't shut. we're going to have to do some surgery on your ears to try to get a little bit of your hearing back, right? We're going to have to try to do some things to compensate because you're going to be this way the rest of your life. And what happened for me was I walked into that office that day, and he throws 2 MRIs up on the screen, the one they had taken the day before and the one from 2 weeks before, and I watch them go back and forth. It's not big computer screen. This is like white, remember they had the white light boards, right, with those kind of gray images? And he's going back and forth, and he's looking there, and he pulls out his folder, and I'm like wondering what's going on here. And he looks at me, and I'll never forget it, with a baffled look on his face. And he said, son, I don't know how to explain this. He said, but it looks to me like your brain has been rebuilt in the last 2 weeks. He said, you won't be paralyzed any day now. And I'll never forget, this is what he said. He looked at me again with just this baffled look. He said, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And I knew. And you knew. And Tom knew. And the next day I wasn't paralyzed. And that'll get your attention. I've been the recipient of biblical scale miracles in my life. And guess what? I'm not alone. I'm not alone in this room. There's a whole lot of people that are supposed to be dead. There's a whole lot of people in this room who aren't supposed to have the life we have today. And the age of miracles is not over. And the most powerful thing for me is not my miracles anymore, it's watching yours. And you get to be a front row seat. When we get to do this thing like Tom did for me, I get to do that for somebody else. I get to do that for a Mark A. or a Dave N., right? I get to watch the light come on in their eyes. I get to watch God work in them and change them and transform them, and then watch them pass it on to others. Man, to see those ripples of love and service pour out from Tom to me, it's generation after generation after generation. I've been here long enough to watch the generations, to see the spiritual pyramid build up around us. My God, in this experience you must not miss. You won't want to miss it. Life will take on meaning to watch loneliness vanish, to watch others recover. That's what it says in chapter 7. That's what was done for me, and that's been the greatest blessing to watch it happen for others, And so I've only got 15 minutes left, but I hope you get a pretty clear picture of what it was like and what happened, right? And so I'll just walk through some snapshots. So in the first year, I had done all the 12 steps with my sponsor by the time I was sober, about 7 months. Some people do it faster, some people do it slower. I don't know. It's just my experience, right? We did them right out of this book. He was a big believer in this book. And we worked through the 12 steps, and I got to 12, and I said, what do I do now, Tom? There's no more steps left to do. He said, now you live them. And by then I had a knucklehead who'd asked me to be a sponsor, so I went to Tom and said, what do I do, Tom? He said, well, you say yes. And he said, don't tell him what you think, tell him what you did. Remember, you are not even powerful enough to get you sober. Don't think you can get him sober. Right? And so I started doing things like sponsoring people, and by then I could drive a car again, so I started doing what people did for me. Anytime somebody's in the hospital, my ass was going there. This old guy, Jim G, was in the hospital because he had a heart attack. Hell, Jim didn't even hardly know me. I heard Jim G's in a heart attack. Man, I'm burning rubber to the hospital. I come to 12-step Jim G in the hospital. Jim's sober 30 years. He was so happy that I came to see him, man. Jim G and I were friends until he died. And, and if somebody needed a ride, man, I'm there. I'm driving 2 hours to go pick somebody up, to drive an hour to take them to a meeting, drive them all back, and 6 hours later I'm home. I'm just so excited to give back what I was given. And at the end of the year, I call that year Hope by the Bucket's Full. Yeah, year of miracles and hope by the bucket full. And what I walked away with there was tears in my eyes on my first anniversary. And then I don't know about you. So about 25% of AA doesn't make it a year. That's the statistics, roughly. AA does a member survey every few years, and so, it's pretty consistent. About a quarter of AA is less than a year when they ask how long people are sober. And the reason I think that is because, like me, for 3.5 years, I never did the steps. So I never could get a year, right? But I did the steps, and I got that year. The next shocking statistic is between 2 to 5, we lose another 25%. And I know why that is, because what happens for a guy like me is I get a year sober and my ego begins to rebuild. And I went back to college, and I started getting some good grades. Made the dean's list my first semester. I wanted to quit, and my sponsor wouldn't let me quit. I wanted to quit about midway through that semester, and he told me in Alcoholics Anonymous, we don't quit. You either make it or you fail, and it's okay to fail. It ain't okay to quit. Right? He said, you keep praying, go to God, and you keep them new people with you. I said, how's a new person going to help me with school? He says, I don't know, but if you work with a new person, God will give you whatever you need. And if he wants you to get a college degree, then you'll get a college degree. And if he doesn't, that's okay too. He'll have other work for you to do. But he said this, I want you to do what you do in AA. And I said, what's that, Tom? He said, didn't I tell you to get to meetings early? I said, yeah, get to the meetings early. Didn't I tell you to sit up front so you don't get distracted? Yeah, Tom, sit up front. He said, sit up front in your class. Get your class early. He said, didn't I tell you if you don't understand something that's happening, you find a group of old-timers in AA that know what's going on? And you ask them? I said, yeah. He said, find yourself a group of winners that know what's going on in college and ask them for help. And I did that, and I made Dean's List. You know, everything I know in Alcoholics Anonymous, I learned that like first 6 months in my sobriety. Really everything that I've learned in life. You know, that works in work too. Go figure. Show up early. Pay attention. You know. Do what you say you're going to do. Either yes or no, and no doesn't require an explanation. You know, those kind of simple things that my sponsor taught me. Very simple things. And so I celebrated that first year, but between 1 and 5, really probably 1 and 4, my ego tried to kill me. You know, I started going to college. I got back in the gym. I'm painfully single, so I'm trying to find her now. You know, and so that's being single in AA is a whole journey. And man, I screwed that up a lot. But what my sponsor had me do in the 4th and 5th step, of course I'd done the house cleaning and looking at my resentments, looking at my fear. And when he had me look at my sex conduct, what he had me do was, of course, clean up everything that, talk about everything that I had done that, and a lot of that stuff was like, I'm going to go to my grave with secrets. And I found out after doing an awful lot of 5th steps after that, my God, we're all so similar in all the stuff that we think we're going to take to our grave and make us unique, that everybody's got that. In fact, I usually drop my top 4 right off the bat when I'm talking to somebody about writing a 5th step, so they know right away that, hey, it's no big deal, because that stuff doesn't have power over me anymore. It has no power over me anymore, right? And but what he told me to do now, by the time I'm sober years, he said, hey, pick up that, I want you to pick up that. He said, you remember in there it talks about a sane and sound ideals list for a relationship? He said, I want you to start doing a little bit of writing on who do you want to be? Who do you want to be in a relationship? And be honest about it. And what do you think God wants that to look like? He put he put his finger on the scale a little bit, because he knew I was a 23-year-old guy. And sometimes what I want as a 23-year-old guy and what God wants may not be the same thing, but he believed I probably had enough a little bit of enough spiritual foundation that I could tell a little bit of that difference. And he said, then I want you to write what you think God would have you have in the partner. And I began to write the qualities that I wanted to have. That I wanted to be faithful, and I wanted to be loving, and I wanted to be gentle, and I wanted to be committed, and I wanted to be supportive of their spiritual growth, right? All these kind of things. I wanted to be attracted to them physically, mentally, and spiritually, and that was okay, he told me. That God didn't want me to settle. It was okay to want those things. But just don't dictate exactly what that looks like. Maybe leave God a little bit of room to work, And then I saw that I wanted similar things from a partner. And then he forced me to look at it. And every time I'd ask a girl out. So if I knew that, man, she's really pretty, but she doesn't have anything else on this list, now it got really hard for me to be like, all right, what am I doing here? This isn't right. And what happened is my decisions began to get better. And then one day I was about 4 years sober, and she walked in a meeting, and we were all dating each other back then, because there wasn't that many young people, so we'd all take turns dating each other, and we'd all dated each other 2 or 3 times by then. But this woman was new, and I was like, ooh, a new one. But I learned you got to be careful, right? So I stalked her a little bit, and I found out where her home group was and went there. And it turned out her sponsor was, she moved from California, which is always a little scary. Sometimes, especially coming from like San Diego or down the road, my God, they might have been the other Clancys. They might have been some of that line. We got to be careful with them. But it turned out she had this great smile, and she had a solid program. And I didn't ask her out. I asked her sponsor if I could ask her out. Because her sponsor knew me. And her sponsor asked what my motives were, and I told her. I said, look, I got this ideals list. I don't know if she totally lines up, but she's got a lot of it, and I'd like to find out. And she said, okay. And I asked her out. We went out on our first date, and it was 30 years ago. And she's been my wife for 28, and she's sober 31 years. And so what's the chance that boy meets girl on AA campus with 1 year sober and 4 years sober, and you build a life together? In Alcoholics Anonymous, when God's in the middle of it, pretty damn good. And her sponsor, her second sponsor, Maureen, passed away. She got the second sponsor, Virginia. That's who Tom was talking about with Sister Teresa, at Mother Teresa in Baltimore. And this woman, I got it in the front of my big book. She drew a triangle when we were dating, and she put God at the center, and she put Dave, and my wife's name's April, in each corner of the triangle. And she said, if you both grow towards God, you always grow closer together. And so for the last 30 years, we've done Alcoholics Anonymous all in. We've got married, we've built careers, we've raised kids. And anybody in here who's been through that journey in sobriety, man, it is not an easy game. Especially when them kids are young and you're trying to work and build careers and be active in AA and you're sponsoring people, and feels like there's 5 plates in the air and 3 of them broken on the floor, and there's never enough time, and nobody's sleeping in the house ever, right? And everybody is sick all the time, But man, we kept showing up and did our best, And so yeah, we might have waffled around in those lines to get to God, and a little marriage counseling thrown in the middle of it all. I mean, a few decades of being together is not always easy, but it's worth it, And we got a beautiful life today. Between 10 and 20 was really raising the kids, and trying to build careers and staying active in AA. But between 10 and 20 is when I got some of my best sponsees, some of the most powerful examples I had were after I was sober 10 years. It seemed like when I was young, I sponsored hundreds of these young guys who seemed like they would come and go. And I mean, there was just always a revolving door of them, right? I'm picking them up in the car and driving them all over the place, and then they're gone, right? And there's another one. And then that one comes back again. We do another round, but none of them stayed sober. Hardly none of them stayed sober. But when I was sober about 9-10 years, I started getting, for whatever reason, I started getting some that stuck. Mark was one of those, right? This guy Dave was one of those. This guy Chandler, who just celebrated 33, was one of those. And I began to get these guys coming into my life. Sometimes, usually, I started sponsoring a lot of people who had sponsors before, and some I was getting fairly early in their sobriety, others I was getting a little bit down the road. Like this guy Chandler had 9 years and was ready to shoot himself in the head, and sometimes we reach bottoms in sobriety. And I began to watch their lives change, and I began to see a fellowship grow up about them, and it was a hard time and a beautiful time trying to raise kids. I got overly centered on work and trying to move up the ladders at work, right? I had a chance to finish that college degree, the first one, and then I got a couple more after, including a PhD, and it doesn't stand for poor, helpless, drunk anymore. But I don't think God cares about me being a PhD. I think the only reason he wanted me to get a PhD was just so that I can tell you that there's enough power in Alcoholics Anonymous to take a guy laying on the bed with his brain scrambled, more dead than alive, and make him a PhD engineer if he wants to. Now, part of that story is I also got fired by my PhD advisor for going off and getting married and building a house and not doing the work that he paid me to do. And then the only reason that I wound up getting a PhD, because as part of my amends to him, I had to go work for free, not because he wanted me to work for free, but because I owed him. And he agreed to let me work for free for a semester, and I did well enough that he decided to keep me on, and ultimately I got, So everything in my life, it seems like, it wasn't like, it's like if you look at Scrap Heap of Humanity to 34, it looks like a straight line, but it's a lot like the stock market. When I got sober, the Dow Jones was 2,900. It's about 43,000 or so today. That looks like a straight line. But I tell you what, when you look at that sucker over years, there's like decades where it's flat or it's down or any given day, man, that's what my sobriety is like. So please hear me. Man, what binds us together is not all the successes, not the virtues. It's the failures, it's the struggles, it's the painful times in sobriety. And there's a line in the big book that talks about we have to perfect and enlarge our spiritual condition, or we will not survive, hear this, the certain trials and low spots ahead. And so I think sometimes, especially when I watch people when we're newer, is we can think that if we do this thing, nothing bad's ever going to happen. People aren't going to die. Things are always going to be fair. Everything's going to go our way. And when it doesn't, it can rattle us. And it rattled me. And I think some of the most powerful examples that I have in Alcoholics Anonymous is how when the chips are down for one of us, when one of us is terribly broken, how we rally around each other and hold each other up, right? And we keep each other from drowning in that disease of alcoholism. And we help get each other to shore where we're safe and protected and where we belong again until the power and the life comes back in us. And then we're able to take that wreckage, that brokenness in our sobriety, and we're able to use that to help somebody else build their bridge over their troubled waters when it comes. And so it's actually the things that I've struggled with in my sobriety that I think are some of the most powerful things. I did not father well. It did not come easy to me.